Hello, everybody. My guest today is Sydney Hockett. Sydney is a vice president for Evergreen Services Group out of the Bay Area in San Francisco, California. Evergreen is a private equity group with a buy and hold strategy, much like Berkshire Hathaway, but focused on managed services, so outsourced IT firms. I got to know Sydney a few years ago. She had been doing some outreach to me and my leadership team on just exploring whether or not we were interested in selling the business. I told her at the time, no, we're not interested in selling, but I'm interested in visiting with you anyways, just to learn about what it is that you do. And we've maintained a friendship since then, and we check in with each other every 6 months or so. In this conversation, we focus primarily on the Evergreen business model and on managed services. We talk about kind of the ins and outs of the industry, what makes a company a good target for them, what they're looking for in terms of client retention and revenue and EBITDA margin. We talk a lot about just the industry itself and where it's headed, but very useful conversation for anybody in this space that's potentially exploring an exit in the future, and would obviously recommend Sydney and her team just based on my experience with them. So with all that said, I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Sydney Hockett.
I think the point of putting this on was that we don't feel like a lot of the other events are actually creating a lot of value for people. It's gotten to be a lot of vendor stuff, too much content all at once. So I just hope people walk away with something that's really useful.
What do you have planned?
I mean, all
Can
the
you
sessions.
sneak preview any of it, or is this like
I can
limits?
sneak
We can't
preview
talk about it.
Yeah. Like the day basically steps through different pieces of value creation, from leadership and building the right team to managing your P&L correctly. Then some of like the organizational best practice stuff. So, kind of touching from a sales org to your team in general to your P&L. Like, how are you making sure that you're focused on value creation through all of that? So, and then some of it is M&A focused too. Like, we have our main counsel there who's talking through, like, this is what you should be thinking about. This is what we're going to look at, the do's and don'ts of that.
Yeah.
So hopefully some tangible things for people to walk away with.
I went to an event like this last week in Houston, and it was a financial planning firm that does real ultra high net worth financial management for people that want to take a portion of their net worth and break it off and let this company manage that as a part of their portfolio. And like, I knew the guy that worked for the company. It was a good event. Like, it was well organized. The food was great. It flowed well. It was unmistakably a sales pitch.
Yeah.
How do you avoid that? Or can you avoid that?
I don't think you can entirely avoid it, but I think part of the way we try to avoid that is, like, one of our main competitors is speaking. We have outside people there, so it's not just Evergreen.
Oh, okay. One of your main competitors is speaking at your event.
Yeah.
That's bold.
But we really wanted this to be about helping MSPs build value and about the community. Like, I would be lying if I said we don't hope that this makes people think about Evergreen when they are ready to sell. But this is not about me and my team being there and saying, hey, have you thought about selling? What's your timeline? How are things going? It's really about, okay, this is what your sales function looks like today. What can you take away from this and make that better? Or, do you even break out your P&L, track the profitability of your clients, and things like that? So I think it is bold, but particularly for the first time doing this, I think there's going to be hesitancy around going to an event put on by an acquirer. And so how do you mitigate kind of that fear?
Are all of your attendees local MSPs?
No, from all over.
Really?
Got one from Australia.
Just coming to Austin for the event.
Made a bigger US trip out of it, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. So I definitely want to talk. I want to talk about Evergreen. I want to talk about the MSP space. Obviously, that's how we know each other. I want to talk about your sales pitch to me, because we're in a space. I'm assuming that I have the same experience that most MSP owners do that are in my position, which is I get bludgeoned to death with emails and phone calls from private equity looking to do a roll up. And it's to the point now, Sydney, where I just ignore them.
Get that?
Because you can't reply to all of them. There's too many of them. So I want to spend a little bit of time there, but I would prefer to pause and just start with what got you into it to begin with.
Sure.
Because I would say you have an unconventional path. You have a degree in economics and French from Notre Dame.
Yep.
Why economics and French? How does that happen?
Fair question. I think high level for me, I liked having the balance of kind of two different sides of my brain. Got the very quantitative, math heavy side with econ, and then kind of switch to the other side, more literature based, not all the way creative, but different set of skills. I lived in France when I was really young, and so French has always come fairly naturally as an English speaker.
Mm,
And so I think there was part of that just natural I took throughout high school. Enjoyed those classes. It came perhaps easier than other English speakers, and so, that was sort of an extra. Econ, I really didn't know what I wanted to do going into college, and I had a professor my freshman year, and all we did in our intro to microeconomics class was read the newspaper and point out economic examples in day-to-day news, and I think for me, it was the first time school actually related to the real world.
uh,
And I always liked school, but I always felt like, why are we doing this? What am I actually gonna use from this? Which I'm sure most people feel, but for me, it was sort of a light bulb moment of, aha, that's how. And so that really got me hooked. Didn't like every class, but I think econ was a good balance for me of analytical, but not so deep in, the finance weeds, which I'll probably talk about as we go through my background a little bit more. It felt very applicable to real life. I like the human behavior aspect of it.
mm.
So that was kind of the reasoning behind the econ bit.
Okay. So how do you take a degree in French and economics and somehow end up in a career in private equity? Because this is not your first stop, right? Alpha
No,
Sites was your first was
that's
that your
right.
first gig out of college?
That's right.
Talk about that a little bit if you would.
Yeah, so I think going through econ was an interesting major in that you kind of get funneled in with all the business school people as well, even though it's actually not part of the business school. But
Mm,
when it comes to recruiting and career path choice, so I think what I was exposed to was a lot of the classic, big four consulting, investment banking
mhm.
roles. I was always interested in private equity to the extent that a 20-year-old in college understands what private equity is, which is
Right.
not a lot. But I think there was an element of the process of businesses being bought and sold, I've always found very interesting. And I think there's an allure to the business world that, that sort of naturally exists when you're going down that track from a education standpoint. As I went through kind of the recruiting process, it became very clear to me very quickly that some of those more traditional banking and consulting routes were not exciting to me.
Why?
I am not I don't like to be that quantitative on the banking side.
Mm,
Getting deep in Excel, the modeling, the PowerPoint, like that was just less exciting to me. I really like the people side of things, the relationship aspect.
mm.
I think consulting fit that better. I was less interested in such an enormous firm, and I think some of the case interviews were not my strong suit, nor did I nor did I like them. And so I really had no idea what I wanted to do. Alpha Sites is an expert network, and what that means is their clients are large private equity firms, consulting firms, corporations who reach out to them and say, "We are doing diligence on this new industry or business. We want to talk to experts in that space, be it former employees, customers, consultants." We go out and find those people and set them up on calls.
Mm.
So kind of professional matchmaking, but I think for me, what I really liked about it is that I had a lot of exposure to private equity. I also was just talking to people all day and learning about a ton of different industries. So the things I knew I liked around people and relationship building were very much a part of that job. And then I was getting exposure to a lot of different things as I tried to figure out what I wanted to do. And through that, started to learn a lot more about private equity and the different roles that exist. I think generally you hear someone works in private equity and you think of the traditional investing professional who runs the due diligence process, does the financial modeling, and signs off this business is what we thought it was, we'll acquire it. I sit more on the front end of that now
Mm.
where it's the sourcing side, meaning my team and I are responsible for identifying new businesses, sometimes new industries, building those relationships. It's sales in and of itself of, hey, can we sell Evergreen? Is this a place you do want to come work? And so early on at Offsites, getting exposure to different roles within the industry that I was interested in was important to me. And I think also at Offsites we were one small piece of the deal process. And I was really excited about being actually a more permanent part of, seeing that phase of companies.
Yeah. So how does the transition from Alpha Sites over to Evergreen happen? Did you know people that were at one and went to the other?
I knew Alpine, which is Evergreen's backer,
Okay.
and for me, Alpine had always stood out. Their kind of mission is around being people first, and so it was very different culturally from what I think most people think of as traditional private equity, and that was important to me as a young professional, as a young female professional. I think looking to not fall into what was typically the private equity cultural stereotype, and I think a very people first organization was exciting. Got introduced to Evergreen, honestly, fairly fortuitously, through a recruiter, but I did know of Alpine, and so that piqued my interest. I wasn't necessarily looking to leave Alpha Sites at the time, and I think for me, there were really 2 things that sold me. One was Evergreen's model, which I'm sure we'll get into,
Oh,
but
yeah.
we don't sell our businesses, and so the longer term approach was very important to me, especially as I think about being kind of the face of Evergreen. I am the one telling these founders, "Hey, this is what we're gonna do with your business." I'm far more excited about saying, "Hey, we're gonna buy your business and partner with you forever," than I am about, "Hey, we're gonna buy your business, do XYZ, and sell it off in 2 years." So that was
Mhm.
important to me personally. And then, I joined Evergreen very early, and my interviews were with the 3 founders, and they were just people I wanted to work with, which I feel like is more than half the battle,
Yeah.
in terms of, career satisfaction, and that has very much continued to ring true.
Hard to beat that when you know the people that are at the top making the primary decisions for the
Mhm.
business, and you know that you get along well with them.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah, and I they really believed in what they were doing, I believed in what they were doing, and it was a pretty unfiltered view because it was so early that there was not a lot of structure and certainly no marketing or presentation around it. It was
yeah.
just, "Hey, we have this vision, we've started executing on it, and we really wanna build more, and, we need a team to be part of that."
So had they already decided at the time they were at Alpine at the time, I guess?
2
The
of our
original
founders
founders?
were at Alpine when they had the idea for Evergreen.
Okay.
Evergreen was formed when I joined. They'd already acquired 10 or 12
Okay,
businesses,
that was gonna be
MSPs.
my next
Yeah,
question.
so
So
that
they
that
got
had been
into it
decided.
with the intention of being an MSP shop primarily.
Yes. First had the idea for Evergreen. Like, what came first, chicken or the egg? It wasn't MSPs, it was Evergreen, but I think as you think about a model where we never sell the businesses, it's incredibly important that the businesses we invest in are long-term businesses.
Yeah.
They're not highly cyclical, they're very predictable, the recurring revenue piece, but then also adaptable, I think is almost more important in that we've seen it over the last 5, 6 years even, the changes in cloud and security, AI and automation is really the thing right now. Like, MSPs are not only adaptable along that, they're leading it, and that's important as we think about owning these businesses in 30, 40 years. So, it was important that we picked industries that would fit with our model, and then there was also an element of MSPs are typically smaller businesses than what Alpine was looking at, on their investments, and so the intention was obviously never to be competitive to Alpine. We wanted to be a long-term strategy as part of their portfolio. And I think MSPs was a very attractive industry where had all the components we were looking for that fit this
Mm.
long-term vision. It was not a place that Alpine was already playing and then was a highly fragmented market. So just a ton of opportunity from an M&A perspective.
Gotcha. And how long have you been there now?
Just over 5 years.
Okay, so 5 years ago, there were 10 transactions under their belt,
Mhm.
give or take.
Yes.
How many transactions now?
We've done 95 MSPs.
95 MSPs.
I think about 110 total. We have 2 other industries where we focus now
What are
too.
the other 2?
ERP partners, so businesses
Okay.
that resell generally cloud-based ERP platforms, then do effectively managed services around them, and then we have a
Mm,
government services division as well.
gotcha, but of 120 some odd transactions, 95 of them are MSP, so
Yes.
you're primarily focused there,
Yeah.
and just got out of the US, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Got out of the US about 18 months ago. Got out of North
Still in the
America. Got out
US.
of North America.
Yeah,
We did go into Canada in 2021, I believe.
okay,
But then fall 23 went to the UK, and January 24 Australia, New Zealand.
okay.
And those have been really exciting growth vectors for
What's
us.
the plan from now? Is it to continue to expand globally?
We're gonna stick with our existing geographies for now. I think worst case scenario would be to do 1 or 2 deals and just have them on an island. Like, we really wanna get them right. We wanna build out our operating team there and have, a strong group of businesses in each country that is growing well, excited we continue to build. So I think we will pause on additional countries for this minute, but
Yeah.
probably on the docket down the line.
There's got to be complexities when you go into a new marketplace that has a totally different culture altogether, let
Yeah,
alone
I
business climate or governmental climate.
all of the above. If you got our CFO on here, he'd probably be less excited about this. The legal and tax component is really
Sure.
difficult. Just executing a transaction is a lot harder. But then, yeah, I mean, we've actually built out local teams in both places because the cultural differences, the time zones, understanding how to
Right.
speak that quote unquote language, obviously English speaking countries, but they are different cultures. Even the things, in the UK, they write their date differently than the way we do. It's day, month, year instead of vice versa. And doing little things like that really matters as you think about, hey, I want to build trust with someone such that they want to sell me what they've been doing for their entire lives. Like you have to pay attention to those things. And I think
Right.
it's just been important to have local teams.
Yeah. What's your, if I can ask, your sales cycle from the point you make contact with an MSP, how
Mm.
long does it typically take to get that deal done?
It really depends, but I would say that the early stages are the most there's the biggest range there. So,
Yeah.
we are buying some businesses now that we started talking to 5 years ago.
Ah,
But let's say, we have a conversation now, it's a good fit for what Evergreen's looking for, Evergreen's a good fit for what they want in a buyer, they're ready to sell. I would say 90 days usually.
okay.
Once we sign an LOI, we've agreed on evaluation, our diligence period is 60 days. So it's pretty fast.
Quick
The
diligence.
most, indeterminate period is the are you ready to sell? Is it a fit for what we're looking for? That relationship building period can be pretty quick or quite long.
Yeah.
I would say generally longer.
I would say in my experience with you, given what I told you from the very get-go that
Mm,
like, no, we're not really looking to sell.
yeah,
When we met was probably what, 2 years ago
something like that.
going on?
Mhm.
At that time, the thought was I had not been taking calls from private equity groups at all. I had started to see them quite a bit. This is sort of COVID era and immediately post COVID. So
Mhm.
there was interest prior to COVID, but COVID really started the interest, at least
Yeah.
where it caught my awareness.
Mhm.
And for the whole first year or 2 of the COVID era, I'm not interested in selling, so why would I take time to
Mhm.
take these phone calls? And
Yeah.
then in 2022 probably, so yeah, it's been almost 3 years,
Yeah.
I started taking every call. I
Mhm.
had a buddy who had done some stuff in private equity, owns a big consumer goods business, and, he was the one that told me, "No, you're looking at that the wrong way. You need
Mhm.
to not wait until you're ready to sell that business to start having those conversations because you need to know the lexicon. You need to know who the players are. You
Yeah.
need to know multiples. You need to be able to speak the language well before you actually decide you want to sell. And if you do it well, form relationships with people where when that time comes,
Mhm.
you can make a phone call and say, "Hey, Sydney, remember
Yeah.
that thing we've been talking about? Like, I'm ready. Let's go."
Yeah.
So you caught me at an interesting time where I had started taking all of the meetings I could just to learn the space. You are one of 2 companies that I had a second meeting with. Everybody
Appreciate that.
else, you go and you have a first conversation, you realize, like, they're doing a roll up.
Mhm.
They're rolling all these small MSPs up into big, traditional MSP models, and unless I
Mhm.
wanna go work for a big MSP, man, that doesn't have a whole lot of intrigue for me.
Yeah.
I'm not a real good employee.
I don't think you're alone in that as a business owner.
Yeah. So talk about your approach when you're pursuing somebody like me, given what you know about the activity in our space, particularly with private equity and investment bankers just
Yeah.
calling people up and down.
Yeah.
How do you break through that noise?
I don't have I wish I had the perfect answer because to your point, I think it's 3 or 4 years ago, emailing people worked.
Right.
That does not work anymore.
It sure doesn't.
And my team and I spend a lot of time thinking about not only how we get in touch with people, but how do you build Evergreen's presence such that people want to talk to you? And we can get into all the different ways that we do that through events and gifts and emails and all of that. But ultimately, once you get your foot in the door, I think our story and our model really does differentiate, and I think being able to tell that is what's important for us. We are very different, like you mentioned. I think 2 things I already talked about the hold forever piece. So I think a lot of people the fear is once you sell, you no longer own it, you have no control over the decision making in the business, and generally that's a fair thought, because you aren't the owner anymore. And I think most buyers have a specific timeline they're working on, and
Mm,
they have to generate X returns in Y time frame, and then they will no longer be the owners. We still need to generate returns. We need our businesses to grow, and we care about that, but once we own it for life. So, it's a different approach and mindset in that if we make short-term decisions around people or systems or anything like that, we pay the price for the fallout of those as much as the people at the business do down the line. And so we're thinking much longer term in that. And then from an operational standpoint, we are very decentralized. So you alluded to this, but we are not integrating and rolling up our businesses.
mm,
We leave the day to day operations of each business fairly independent. And there are pros and cons to every model. Our view is that you often break a lot more than you fix with MSPs specifically when you integrate them. I think
mm.
there's so much brand equity built in these businesses, regional presence, and yes, the world has changed where most of this can be done remotely, but I do still think there is, you know, you probably run into some of your customers at the grocery store.
Mhm.
And I think the relationships between customers and techs, like these things are what MSPs are a services business. It's not just a license that could be any brand. The people really matter, the brand matters. And so we leave that independent. We keep the brands in place, we keep the teams. And then we have kind of an umbrella management team that sits over all of our MSPs called Lyra Technology Group.
Mm,
Lyra is not an MSP itself, but rather acts as a couple of different roles. One, the connective tissue between our businesses. So I think of our portfolio like a large peer group. We want our businesses to be talking, best practice sharing, cross selling where it makes sense, resource sharing. Do you have a customer in California? Can one of our businesses there? You need boots on the ground. Can you partner with another evergreen business to do that? One business has figured out something great around how they've really increased employee NPS. How do we make sure our other businesses know about that and can implement that if they want? They also work with vendors on, pricing, packaging. So if you are using a tool set that we have kind of a master contract with, often have better pricing at scale, can you opt into that? So some of the tactical kind of margin uplift things that, one generally hopes they get when they sell. And then really the point of Lyra is, people say, great, you don't integrate your businesses, you don't break what's not broken. How do you make them better? Like, why sell if I'm not just trying to cash out? And that's where Lyra comes into play. This suite of kind of opt-in resources of
mm.
you have a pain point, can we help solve it? I would say that generally manifests in recruiting, help finding the right talent. That's a lot of what Lyra does. Building out sales and marketing teams and playbooks. I would say that's generally, we more often than not see principal-led sales and MSPs. And so as we think about the business long term, how do we help kind of mature that function? Accounting and finance help. You say I'm struggling with this. Lyra is a team of, 50 or 60 people now that exist to help kind of take our businesses to the next
Hmm.
level. So that's how we think about our structure and kind of operations. And we've broken 95 businesses is a lot. They're broken down into 10 or 11 regions now. And there's a regional CEO over, each set of those businesses. It's created communities within those as well.
Hmm.
And I think what's been really cool is half those regional CEOs are actually sellers that sold to us, ran their business, really wanted to take on a larger role and elevated up into that regional CEO position.
Oh, that's cool. So of the companies that you acquire, what percentage of the founders stick with the business through acquisition and then beyond and
Mhm.
remain a part of that operation versus they're looking for their ripcord,
Yeah.
they get paid, they're out?
It's about half and half right now.
Half and
Half
half.
and half. We're pretty flexible on that front. I think if you are excited, we have some amazing success stories. People that have maybe they want to de-risk financially, all the money that they've put in the business, kind of cash out on that value, but want to keep running it, want more support in doing that. For a lot of people, it's de-risking on the security front,
Hmm.
that liability. Those have been great stories for us. Equally, we have a pretty robust recruiting pipeline for backfilling leadership talent at our businesses where someone wants to transition out. Our kind of one thing that we really care about is we always place someone into each business that we acquire, even if a founder is staying on. It's not meant to displace anyone else, but as we think about long-term succession planning, it's really important. And then also, really, again, taking the business to the next level. Usually, businesses don't have the role we're most often placing is like a CRO or a VP of growth.
Mm.
So, really, someone that wakes up every day and thinks about where the next new logo is coming from. And that's been a really powerful partnership. You still have the founder running the business. We've placed this growth leader and, really seeing that elevate the business.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you've engaged with an owner,
Mhm.
you start the conversation with them. How do you go about evaluating that business, coming up with a valuation? You
Yeah.
had mentioned an LOI gets put in place at some point. I had noticed on your website there's this how do we value an MSP section that has these, I think it was 6 different pillars of
Mhm.
that go into valuing an MSP.
Yeah.
Revenue, growth rate, EBITDA, capital expenditures, customer retention, and customer concentration.
Mm.
Can you talk about those things a little bit?
Yeah, what I would say is there is not a model that we plug your metrics into and it spits out a valuation that's we put in front of you. There is a subjective element to this and some qualitative pieces that are equally as important. So, as we think about valuing a business, typically from a data standpoint, what we're asking for up front is last couple years of P&L statements and balance sheets, and then generally some high-level customer data to just understand kinda the top customer spend. And then we're having conversations around what does your team look like? Who is leading sales? Is the owner wearing 10 different hats? Is your team understaffed right now? Are they running too hot? Are they overstaffed? Do you have room to grow into that or, is it overinvested in? And all of that comes together into how we think about valuation. And yeah, you touched on most of the main ones would be scale. Um, I hesitate to lead with that one because bigger does not always equal better.
Right.
R
Growth rate.
Growth rate, sorry, revenue mix.
Yeah.
So not only your recurring revenue mix, but also what is that recurring revenue? Services versus, office licenses and other recurring products. Growth rate, some more qualitative things like operational maturity of the business. Again, what does your team look like? Do you have room to grow into the existing team, or are we gonna have to invest in it shortly after close because you're running pretty hot? And, a good proxy for that is often EBITDA margin. Where
Mm.
is that sitting? I think this is changing as businesses get more efficient and automated, but that's something we pay attention to. And then the customer bucket is big, and I view kind of 3 main things in that. Customer concentration, do you have a couple customers that are a significant portion of revenue? If so, we're gonna be digging in pretty closely to the contracts with those clients. Are they co-managed versus fully managed? Um, Customer retention. So are you keeping the customers that you have, and are you growing the customers that you have?
Mm.
And then new customers. We see a lot of businesses that have really strong customer retention, but don't really add that many new customers,
Mhm.
which is preferable to the flip side of adding a lot of customers and churning a lot of customers, but if you can do both, that'd be great.
Yeah. What does capital expenditures mean in this context?
Yeah, so that I would say that comes up much less often, like, MSPs are very asset light businesses.
Like you
That
invest in a data center space
Right,
and
that was more relevant, I think, when there was a lot more private cloud happening and you had
yeah,
pretty expensive hardware purchases, and for us, ultimately, we say EBITDA, we're looking at the cash flow of the business, and the
sure.
one that difference between EBITDA and cash flow is they're normally the same number for most MSPs, but if you've gotta spend $500,000 refreshing all your hardware in your data center, well, suddenly those become very different numbers, and
Right.
and we are looking at that. But I would say that's less common. Most businesses are moving towards public cloud offerings and don't have huge capex.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is definitely a change in the industry
Mm.
from when we first got into it.
Yeah, I feel like over the last 5 years, probably seen like three significant shifts. Prior to that, I would say just the movement to managed services and recurring revenue, but then you have kind of the cloud movement,
Mhm.
cybersecurity growth, and that's been a huge growth vector for our businesses even, is getting all of your clients on a cybersecurity package.
Mhm.
And I would say now, the AI and automation bit is really kind of the big thing.
Yeah, I wanna talk about that. That's one of the things that I put in
Yeah.
here as, like, a thing to come into,
Mm.
but before we go into that, you had mentioned when you're working with a company, you're really trying to evaluate how leveraged or not leveraged their staff is.
Mhm.
Do you have data points that you're looking for? Are you looking for average tickets that a technician closes a month? Are you looking for utilization
Yeah,
rates? Are there guideposts there that you're commonly looking for? Or how often do you get into a business where none of that stuff exists and you have to create it?
often.
Often.
Every business track things differently. I think we have a pretty good handle on revenue per full-time employee that we're looking at, and
Mhm.
obviously not every employee is directly revenue generating, but on average, just think about what an MSP takes. We have average metrics across our portfolio of, what do we think is sustainable revenue per FTE. I would say the other place where we look at that is the EBITDA margins.
Mm.
So, we kind of have this framework that we share a lot of you've got kind of the overinvested businesses that I would say are 8 to 10% and lower. And those businesses, either the wrong people have been hired, it's vastly overstaffed. Um, can be a low cost provider, meaning, you win business on being the lowest price option. Those are really hard businesses to grow because you can't grow
Mhm.
within the existing client base. That's one set of issues. I think if you see a business that's been, 7, 8% EBITDA margins for a really long time, that's harder to get excited about because it's harder to grow. The other time you see that is a very resale heavy business. So
Ah,
you're reselling a lot of products. That's just
you're making your money
naturally
off
lower
product.
margin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you've got kind of this, what we view as the sweet spot of kind of 10 to 15 or 17%, maybe lower than what we would say is best in class MSP, but is a really exciting opportunity for us. So that
Mm.
business has generally invested in the team, they've invested in their tech stack, and they have room to grow into what they currently have. That's
Mm.
pretty exciting for a buyer because we say, okay, we want to come in and help grow this business. The existing team is there to do that.
Right.
I would say 15, 17 to kinda 25 is what, we would consider best in class MSP margins. It's optimized well, it's not running too hot. That's a solid MSP. Also excited about those.
Yeah.
Then you start to get to high 20s, 30s, that makes us worried. I would say that is the most concerning margin profile for us, and I feel like there's a lot of misinformation about this out there. Like, there's generally the thought of the higher the margins, the better your business, and that's just not true. For us, we're looking at that and saying, "Okay, we buy this business, we're gonna have to put more money into it immediately after close to be able to actually grow it sustainably
Just because they're running on
because 'cause they're
fumes.
running on fumes."
Huh.
And so as you think about valuation, I would say that that sweet spot where there's opportunity to grow, we're generally paying the highest multiples because we see opportunity there. Best in class as well, wouldn't exclude that. That's
Yeah.
gonna generate the best multiples. That really high margin business, it say the lowest multiples that we pay, and it's not this huge spread of, many turns of a multiple, but there's just less room to stretch on valuation on those because there's not room to grow, and
Yeah.
it's gonna take more investment.
This was something that interested me that I wondered if we could talk about. But you look at a business that's operating on very low EBITDA margins,
Mhm.
and as an operator, I would assume that you'd look at that and go, there's a lot of meat on that bone. They
Yeah.
just don't know what they don't know.
Mhm.
So you can justify a lower multiple because their EBITDA margins are lower,
A higher multiple.
a higher multiple
Yeah. We would justify a higher multiple on a low margin business because there is
because
opportunity.
there's opportunity to
Yeah.
grow. See, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But the higher that margin gets, the more efficient that business seems to
Mhm.
be running until you get to that super ultra
Yeah.
high EBITDA margin business that is running on fumes.
Yeah.
So there is a sweet spot there.
There is.
Yeah, see, I don't think that many folks in private equity would acknowledge that that's the case.
No, it's a hot topic when we talk about it,
Yeah, yeah.
but I think it's just really real. And I think it took us a while to I would say learn that, and then I think we started having a lot of conversations where people I think it comes into play a lot because people are like, "Well, I don't want you to look at my numbers right now because I haven't optimized them for sale." And I'm like, "Please don't do that. I will." First of all, it'll be really obvious that you did that for any buyer. It's gonna be able to look at your books really quickly and see that you have optimized for sale. And it's not gonna make us value the business higher.
Hmm.
So yes, there's an element of if you're looking to sell in the next year, maybe don't hire 5 new executives, right? Like, there is a balance of do you wanna invest in the growth of your business and stick around for that for the next couple of years and then sell? Or, do you want kind of a new partner for that phase of growth? But the idea of not making any new hires that you need, maybe you don't upgrade a system that is critical to your workflow because you don't wanna make that investment, it's generally not gonna get you a higher valuation, at least not from us.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Okay, so let's talk about AI as it applies to our business.
Mm.
Are you afraid that AI puts a managed service provider out of business?
No. I
Tell me
think it is
why.
going to transform managed service providers. I think it's gonna change the industry, and I think you every MSP has to be open to it and embracing it. Not saying you have to be, the first one using it, but ones that refuse will fall behind. I mean, to be really reductive about it, and I will caveat all of this by saying I am by no means an expert on this front. I call my bank, and I can't talk to a real person, and, like, nothing ruins my day faster.
Yeah.
Like, this is a services business that needs people. I think where the difference will be is that there are plenty of tasks that humans do now that AI can do. I think, like, there's a lot of, level 1 ticket processing and, closing tickets, things like that, that we've seen automation play a great role in. Desktop setups, for instance, I think was one of the first things that, people really started automating. That's great. Save the really high level engineers for, the problems that AI isn't going to fix.
Hmm.
So it may be short-sighted, but I really don't think, and I don't think anyone at Evergreen and Lyra thinks that AI is gonna put a managed services provider out of business. I don't think it's possible because there will always be something new will break, and then you will have to develop the robot that can fix that, but some person's gonna have to do that.
Right. Not to mention, Microsoft doesn't build their tools so they work well with Google tools.
Yeah,
It's not
true.
like they're the same company and they're looking to
Right,
optimize interconnectivity between their tools. You
right.
still need a person that sits in between and says,
Mhm.
"This isn't working, that's not working. How do we make them talk well to each other?"
Yeah.
Yeah, AI doesn't fix that problem. And I'm like you, if I've gone through a menu, by the time I get to a human, I'm kinda pissed about it.
Yeah.
I'd rather just
Totally.
talk to a human being. I'm
Mhm.
the guy that will mash 0 or say
Absolutely.
representative
Every
over
time.
and over and over and over again
Yeah.
until somebody answers the damn phone. Tell me something that, you're optimistic about, not necessarily about the future of MSP, although you could stay in the MSP space.
Sure.
But if you have a reason for optimism about the future, what makes you optimistic?
Oh, man. I think what makes me optimistic, Evergreen is a very young team, and I think it's something that people call out a lot about us, and that's fair,
Young in
but
what way? Personnel are young?
age, personnel, young. The caliber of brains that are coming into our workforce, and one can argue that people are stunted from COVID and social interactions are hard, and I don't disagree with, all of that, but I just am on the worst days, what keeps me at Evergreen is the people I work with, and I'm just continually so impressed, and I see it outside of Evergreen too, and I just gives me faith that whatever else is going on in the world, like, there are really smart people who really care about what they're doing and thinking of incredible ideas all the time.
Yeah, it's a good reason to be optimistic.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanna get you out of here in time to get back to downtown Austin in an
Yeah.
hour. Let's end on this one then. So you are a female working in you're not exactly working in a tech space, right? You're in a private equity space.
Mhm.
Tech is notorious for being very male dominated. I'm assuming private equity probably has some
Yes.
of the similar elements.
Yes.
Does it give you is it a disadvantage for you because it is so male dominated? Or does it give you an advantage being a female in a male dominated space who is herself proficient,
Mhm.
well put together, well spoken, driven?
It's both.
It's both.
Uh,
Where is it a disadvantage?
First impression,
Really?
always.
On who?
Other men
On
in both
me.
spaces.
Okay.
Um, 99 out of 100 times, whether they mean to or not, and I'm not saying this because every man is sexist and doesn't think a woman can do it better. Our society is literally just programmed this way.
Mm.
it's just a reality. And I have opted into 2 industries that are built this way, and I chose that. But there is an immediate there's so many times where someone asks if I'm gonna involve someone else in the conversation.
Really?
I'm a vice president at Evergreen, and people still ask me that, and they do
Really?
not ask people with different titles that are men. Um, I view this as a very competitive opportunity of gonna prove them wrong. Um, but it's not always easy. There's Yeah, it's the first impression generally. I and credit to all the men in both industries as soon as you've demonstrated that you are proficient and competent and can work with them, they, that dissipates pretty quickly more often than not.
Mhm.
Um, but, you know, I you can see it even the way people respond to you.
Mm.
It's just different and you kind of just have to forge ahead. And I personally just don't can't just expect that that's gonna change. That's how our society's been built for hundreds and hundreds of years. We need to change it, but being just angry about it the best way we can change it is by doing our jobs well
Mm.
and showing up every day and just doing that. But it's harder. We gotta work
Mm.
a lot harder to all the females on my team have to work a lot harder in these industries
Yeah.
to be successful.
I've met 2 females on your team, you
Mhm.
and
Sarah,
Sarah. Was impressed by both of you.
thank you.
What advantages does it give you being a female in a male-dominated industry?
I think when you do succeed, it's all that more obvious, I guess, or, people take note. Um, and I think you stand out more in a good way
Hmm.
once you've gotten there. I mean, every panel I've ever been on, the only panel I've been on with women was a women in tech panel.
Okay.
So,
Loaded deck.
yes.
Yeah.
I also think that, the flip side of all the pushback we get that women are too emotional and they bring that into the workforce is we have really high EQ. Like,
Mm.
when I think every female I've had on my team, and I have men that are great at this too, but part of our job is reading sellers and what is important to you and what you care about, and that it is usually far beyond the numbers of a transaction, and I think we're really good at that.
So I said that was gonna be my last question, but I wanna
Yeah.
expand on that a little bit because you're one of very few people that I know that EQ is part of your lexicon.
Mm,
Not many people talk about EQ and the
mhm,
difference in IQ and EQ and how they kinda work in opposition to each other.
mhm.
Our space is notorious for that. You've
Yes.
got dude that started taking apart his parents' computer when he was a kid,
Mhm.
who then sort of fell into managed services as a way to make a living because he was the guy that everybody knew could do computer stuff.
Yeah.
That skill set is typically very high IQ
Mhm.
and an offsetting low EQ. Do you when you're working with IT companies or MSPs, how many of them as a percentage would you say have an understanding of that paradigm?
Oh, man. I better be careful here. Um, I actually would say that a lot of owners have been more self-aware of that than I would have expected.
Really?
Not always, um, but the ones that have built bigger, really operational, mature businesses are. And I think that a lot of frameworks out there like EOS and Traction have been great for this because they separate that visionary and integrator role and
Mm.
sort of call out those different it's not exactly one for one, but call out that difference. But no, I would still say, I mean, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's low. And I think that's part of the reason we've taken the approach to talent that we have is it makes sense why there's lower EQ in businesses and really high IQ. And I don't I think you can have both, but we view it as how do we place someone in the business that's really high on the EQ side? The other way to look at it is maybe we're placing people that don't have technical background, but strong business acumen, and balance that.
Yeah.
Because I get why businesses have the higher IQ side. They're started by someone who had that skill set.
Right.
But I think it's really important to like, you will not build a great business that's large and growing over time
Right.
without both.
And I would actually say too that people that are high EQ,
Mm.
first of all, they know they are.
Hmm.
And second of all, they typically have a low tolerance for being in a room with somebody who has no EQ
Yeah.
and are all IQ,
Yeah.
right?
It's a tough combo.
It's a tough combo for sure.
Yeah.
Sydney, thanks for making time for this. I know
This
you've
is
got a lot
great.
going on with this event tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. I
Yes.
really am.
Appreciate you coming,
Yeah, I've got a couple members of my leadership team that are going
which
to be
is
there
great.
too. So
That's really
we're
exciting.
excited about it. But thanks for making the trip out to Bastrop County to do this.
Thank you.
Yes,
Glad to see the studio.
good to visit with you as always.
No, it's been fun.
All right. Thanks for the time.
Yeah.